Welcome, returning guests, to This Movie Needs More Flavor. We wish to thank you for joining us for part 2 of our take on The Thing. And now, back to Adam.
That adds a certain dimension to this film that has never left me. And that is, I actually fear for these characters. They may not be the most fleshed out, but because I know what's going to happen or I'm anticipating, like, I'm worried for them. I'm like, dude, stay together. Do everything you need to in groups, because that thing will ruin your world.
And that's a testament to the characters, because these are not swell guys. You know, these are not a team of winners. They're not a team of people who have those personalities you can get on board with. And to be so compelled by their plight, that's strong filmmaking.
Absolutely, man.
When you're talking about the characters themselves, you got to give a lot of that credit also to John Carpenter, because he really dived into trying to figure out the exact cast. If you watch the original The Thing before this, obviously the 1982 film, there's a different cast of like members, and I also think that what's kind of interesting is like the original film had like female characters, and John Carpenter took a leap in this film to take it all male characters. And I think at the time, that was something that he wanted to make it to be like divisive. And I think it really established that it worked.
And I agree, it works because there's a lot of testosterone at that base. So even if you didn't have an alien organism trying to kill you and replicate you, you're still going to have that tension there if we're isolated. So, I mean, it just works all around. So the master of splatter, Tom Savini, I love this guy. He consulted Rob Bottin in order to create Fluffy for Creepshow. I covered this in the last episode, but it's Rob Bottin that helmed the effects for this film, as you spoke about, Sean. And that came out the same year as Creepshow, so that's a connection right there. But Bottin, at the time, he was really young. He was 22 years old. Like, 22 years old, I was partying, doing really stupid things. This guy is, like, helming one of the most grotesque, badass horror movies of our time, as far as I'm concerned. So good on him for that. He did an incredible job. The effects, depending on how you look at it, it can be dated, but they were monumental, I believe, for their time, and they still hold up. To a given extent, they still hold up. In fact, for The Thing's final form, it took 50 technicians to run that thing, like the actual physical form. I mean, I thought working Jabba the Hutt was a marvel. Like, dude. At some point, Bottin was in talks or was expressing interest in playing the character Palmer, but some of his crew and people involved with the effects grew upset with this. In fact, one person actually threatened to walk off the project simply because they didn't want the head of the FX crew, which had a huge undertaking, to be divided between a role and the effects. So it was eventually decided and agreed upon, you'll just stick to the effects and we'll get somebody for the role of Palmer.
And who they cast was awesome.
Oh, yeah. I do have a gripe about this film. It could have really used a scene. It wouldn't have hurt. It could have used a scene where Roddy Piper cameos, and when the guys are tied up and they're doing the human test, you could have had Roddy Piper, like, help force Keith David to give up blood for the test. Instead of the line, put the glasses on, could have been like, put the blood in the petri dish. And they could have had like a free-for-all, like Keith David like gets free and they fight for 10 minutes while the Thing is eating windows or whatever. That would have been good, but whatever. It could have been a great crossover event, but they missed out. What are you going to do?
It would have been great, provided a 10-minute fight scene. If no 10-minute fight scene in there, there would have been no need for the cameo at all.
Apparently, this film bombed at the box office. And it personally hurt John Carpenter, because I've read that directors, unless they're just doing it for the paycheck, they take pride in their work. He takes particular pride in his work. He does the scores for his movies. He directs them. He writes some of them. And he was really hurt by it because, as you said earlier, Sean, like, this was his step up. It wasn't just a matter of our opinion. This is what he felt, too. And people panned it. They're like, it's just gross out horror for gross out horror's sake. Oh, they don't flesh the characters out. Well, okay, maybe not terribly much, but it still worked. Anyway, a lot of people didn't show up. And to that I say, for shame. You know, people back in 82, they had a chance to see this gore fresh out of the gate. I never had that opportunity, and you guys passed it up. So, yeah, at least it's cult status.
I think a really interesting fact, too, which you're bringing that up, is there was another Alien film that came out that 1982 that apparently that weekend, and that huge film was E.T.
Oh, right, that little bastard.
I just think that's really interesting because when you look back at E.T. and it's the way it was released, it becomes like a cult icon. Not just a cult icon, it becomes a mainstream icon.
You know what? This might be an unpopular opinion with a lot of people. I don't care. I find E.T. much more depressing than this film. E.T.'s supposed to be a family film, but you got kids like bickering at each other, cursing, a mother who's like bitter and pissed off because of her divorce. Then you got an alien that gets stranded on Earth, left by his people. He becomes sick. What is fun and happy about that shit? It left me like, and then when he's like in the ditch, I'm getting off track, but and this film is fun. The Thing is fun.
That year, which is sad to say, it did prove a point that a sci-fi film could not only just Star Wars, because people a lot of times they go either back to Star Wars or Star Trek, Alien or Aliens can be a super massive success. And for me as an audience member, and if I was alive in 1982, The Thing should have been a super status, super successful, the same regards as E.T. If it wasn't for that small, short alien himself, we would have been in a better position.
Right? That charming little bastard just destroyed any chance for this movie.
You probably saw John Carpenter thinking to himself, if only I had Drew Barrymore. I should have just casted her as the 5-year-old scientist that is the genius of the pack.
People are thinking The Thing would never get her, but guess what? She's the first to get anyway. All right. Just slight backstory or behind the scenes information. Whatever interior sets were used for the film, the Los Angeles sound stages, they were refrigerated to about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So while it was 100 degrees outside, they had it freezing cold inside for whatever shots they needed.
I also heard as well, it's supposed to be set in Antarctica, but the film is actually shot in British Columbia. I believe, if I'm correct, it's actually on the mountains of British Columbia. And just a side note, they apparently use like one really narrow road to get to the top of that mountain. And apparently there's like a crazy story that the team talks about where it had all the actors on one of those old school Greyhound buses. And as they were trying to go up that mountain, they were all asleep one night. We're all going up. And the bus driver goes, "Slide!" And the whole Greyhound bus starts to slide as if it's going off the mountain. And every cast member was like, "Ah!" Like, and apparently, like, they got back control, but they felt like they were about to swing off. And then the rest of that night, they all were driving about 10 miles an hour up that mountain on edge. Everybody's looking straight at the concrete of the road.
That's insane. Lastly, I wanted to add, I heard about this a while back, and I did some very light reading on it. Apparently, it's become a tradition at the British Antarctic Research Station, I believe the Halley Station, if I'm not mistaken, to watch the original Thing from Another World after the last flight out leaves. Because when that flight goes, that's when they know nobody's coming back for months. We're stranded. We're the most vulnerable. And they watch the movie. Apparently it's a tradition of theirs. So I love their spirit. You know, that's great. And yeah, that's ultimately my take on the film.
Awesome. That's a fine take. All right. Well, first up, I just want to mention my two favorite special effects. First is the initial reveal of the Thing. The dog face ripping into quarters, the skull waving around before it's forced out by the lashing tongue. The first time I saw that, I was awestruck. I mean, I've been watching horror movies for as long as I can remember, and when I saw that, breathtaking. It was something that stood out, and it still stands out to this day. And the other shot is probably a favorite of many, and it was mentioned previously, and that's the Norris head spider. But for me, it's not so much the shot of the spider, but it's the shot of that head pulling away. And it's all writhing away, and the lines are feeding out, and those little pus pockets are blowing up.
When I envision that scene right there, it is grotesquely satisfying. It reminds me a few years later when Tom Savini does Day of the Dead, and I believe they're ripping the character Torres's head off, and it looks almost exactly the same. Not as alien, but...
Oh yeah, he called him up for it. Hey, how'd you pull that head writhing away from the body bit?
Well, you gotta put a lot of paint thinner.
What I also find really funny is apparently when Rob... they had the creative meeting about that exact scene that you're talking about. They started pitching him like, okay, so there's all these visual effects we want to try to pulling off. And they're like, Rob, can you do this? And he goes, oh no, I really don't know. I really don't know if I can do this. But I'm sure gonna try.
Hey man, can I play that Palmer?
Right. After you see that shot, I mean, what else is there left to say but what Palmer says? So next, I'd like to pose a question myself, and I got my opinions, but I like both of yours. With the exception of the Norwegians, who gets your vote for most useless? I probably got like 3 nominees myself, but who would you say is the most useless of the crew?
Off the top of my head, I would have to say Windows, probably because he had an opportunity to just save himself and possibly others, and he just bombed.
Oh yeah, he's one of my nominees. He spends the majority of the movie flailing around, getting smacked around, and ultimately just not coming through to save his own ass. So yeah, he's a strong contender.
And I'll be honest, I want to say Windows, and I think you're around the point, and I think most people will say that because the fact that he's all flailing around like, you know,
Blast him!
Come on, Windows! And he's just like stupefied. That would be like, I think most people will say that. But the character to me that frustrates me the most, and I feel like is one of the most useless due to the fact that I feel like they could have, like when you look back at them as a character, they should have been essential to the story. And other than like McGrady himself, like he would have been really important, I think, as Clark, due to his untrusting, I think, like how he talks, like the actual actor who played him as a character, how he talks about his character, his unsteadiness towards humans is kind of seems to be more his character himself.
It's part of the, I think it kind of ties into why his character was so useless and why he died, is because he was only effective in taking care of looking out for him and his dogs. You know, he was very capable of that, but whenever it came to like actually working with others, he was like suspicious from the get-go almost, you know, so it was kind of his undoing.
So he gets your top useless vote because he was the one with the most potential and ultimately didn't do anything.
I think if you look back at it, Windows had every opportunity, like Adam said, he had every opportunity to survive in this film. He was picked first, you know, with the blood. He got the shotgun. He got to the shotgun case first before anybody else. In any situation, he was like put in a position to succeed. His just stupefaction in that moment cost him dearly. Right. But Clark, you know, was the one that took action, which is out of all the other characters, no one takes action the same way he did.
That lends Clark to be the most disappointing for me. Not necessarily the most useless, because he was very useful. He was just the most disappointing because you had the most potential.
All right. I like that. Okay. I also want to mention my appreciation for the characters in this film. So often, especially in horror and sci-fi, characters are initially presented in a way that doesn't match their later motives and actions. You have these films that'll spend the exposition defining one particular guy as the genius. And then that guy who's, you know, the top man in his field will do something stupid and irresponsible like a half an hour in. That's just totally off character. Not this film. Okay. In this film, the guys we find in an isolated outpost in Antarctica are the guys that are supposed to be there. Their incompetence. There's a burnout. They're abrasive assholes. These are the guys that nobody wanted to work with. and now they're stuck there. And you see it in the characters. You've got Donald Moffat's Gary with his literal shoot first attitude. I mean, when he comes on Windows, when Windows grabs the shotgun, he says, "I'll put this through your head." If I was Windows, I'd be like, "Oh, he ain't bluffing." Bennings, played by Peter Maloney, he's an irritable prick. He gets shot, complains about it, and dies, basically. And even, as you said, the best guy they got, Wilford Brimley, he goes apeshit halfway through. And even our protagonist, McCready, he's an ornery drunk. He's an alcoholic. He's self-centered. I just want to go back to my shack and get drunk. And he's our lead. He's the best we got. But presenting the characters with their flaws like that, it sells who they are. And it engrosses you in the situation that they're in. And because of that, and with people like Clark, who, they know how to associate with their dogs better than people, it's things like that in the nature of these characters where there's already a brooding resentment and distrust. And it gets to be fueled and festered by the thing. And I think it's a shame that the initial poor reception of this film was based on the goriness of the creature effects because, well, one, the goriness of the creature effects are awesome and they still hold up. But two, it means that these people got overwhelmed by those creature effects to the point where they missed the psychological component of this film. And the thing isn't scary because you become the thing. The thing is scary because you're no longer you. And these people, they're not only contending with the thing, they're contending with that mounting paranoia.
This does it a lot more gory, but I do think that this film, and especially the remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, really capture like a replicant paranoia attitude so well. This one far gorier and more fun in my opinion. But yeah, they do a fantastic job with just capturing this sense of dread.
Yeah, that incoming, you're going to lose yourself in this.
I think if you're looking back at it and if you were just like, let's say you were to separate this film and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to take out all the special effects and just go by its story itself. The way, like the sci-fi mystery that this film is on its own can carry this film.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I think a lot of people do sit back and they go, man, these special effects are unbelievable. But when you really sit down and you go, okay, let's separate the characters from that actual special effects, it's a damn good movie when you start thinking about it in that aspect, because every single character in this film, believe it or not, even if we think they're useless or not, has weight.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, it really is the whodunit nature of this film that drives its popularity today. I mean, people are still arguing over who got assimilated first, who made it to the end. And that's the main argument. I mean, the special effects, awesome. But what keeps people coming back to it is them having to try and pick apart who it is. And at the end, Childs and McCready are left battling more their distrust of one another than they are the thing. And I think this movie is every bit as much a psychological horror as it is a gore fest. And as a fan of both, it ranks among my favorites and Carpenter's finest.
Music by Ross Dominus. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter, The Film Talk Guys. If you dig our work, give us a like, share, and subscribe.
And as always, we'd like to thank you for listening. And if you've got a little flavor to add to this film, reach out because we want to know what you think. Thanks again and take care.